the Kundalini is it's like a coming together of the feminine and the masculine. And so I had that moment with him, but then alone in prayer and meditation, I surrendered and I emptied out, and I couldn't tell if this light was coming from my head or coming into it. And it really was both. And during those periods in solitude, in prayer and meditation, I was so aroused. I had to like have an orgasm. And so all of a sudden now, this is how sexuality and spirituality came together for me, that in the surrendering, in the opening and becoming receptive to something transcendent, that it is arousing.
Welcome to another episode of What's Up with DJ. I'm your host, DJ. And each week I bring you topics about current events, holistic living, career development, finance, life hacks, and stories of inspiration and humor, all from a spiritual perspective. So, as always, your comments and criticisms are always appreciated and encouraged. Just be kind. With that being said, let's get right into the show. My guest this week is Deborah Lukovich. She's a writer, coach, and she admits to being sometimes an oversharer. She loves taking the mystery out of otherwise difficult concepts and helping people explore the guidance being offered to them by their unconscious via dreams, obsessions, and fantasies, and even anxieties. Her most recent book, Your Soul is Talking, Are You Listening? 5 Steps to Uncovering Your Hidden Purpose, is a framework for self-reflection that includes personal stories of midlife unraveling and healing of personal wounds related to sexuality and spirituality. Her studies in depth psychology, PhD research, and writing help her to find the real purpose of her midlife unraveling and made her realize her experience was part of something new erupting from the collective unconsciousness. Hello today.
Hello.
I'm so glad to have you here.
I'm excited about our conversation.
Yes, I am. Yes, so in the introduction, I talked about this midlife unraveling that occurred for you. So what unraveled for you?
A whole way of existing in the world. It's a long story. And my unraveling, luckily, coincided with this irrational calling to study depth psychology. So, alongside my unraveling, I lived all of these concepts in real time. They weren't just reading about complexes, they were reading and experiencing them at the same time. So, bottom line, really my unraveling had to do with living the first part of my life in a very masculine oriented way, very achievement oriented, very goal oriented. I know what I'm striving for, therefore I can lay out a plan and it all makes sense. I do this first, then this and this and this. I came of age in the 80s. It was a time of great possibility for women, but it was also compensated by a severe and sometimes violent backlash against women's independence. And so I went into my life and I accomplished and I achieved and I had a family and I, was an entrepreneur. And then all of a sudden things started falling apart and I didn't realize that I actually had wounds from coming of age in the 80s, and they had to do with reconciling sexuality and spirituality. So it was quite surprising to me that my midlife unraveling really revolved around that coming together of those issues. And then that led me to learning to live my life in the realm of the feminine. which is not direct, which is not linear. It is the realm of mystery. It's the realm of the unconscious. It's the realm of paradox. It's patience. It's strategic. It's sneaky, actually. And so I had to sort of compensate. And what was interesting is as I healed these wounds and reconciled this energy of sexuality and spirituality and was open and surrendered to the feminine, I burst out with creativity. Whether it was, the books that I wrote, the blogs, my podcast, all of it reconciling wounds that you don't really know that you have. And often your wounds are around tension between things that seem to be in opposition. And and we're full of opposition, when you reconcile and heal those wounds, something new that's creative bursts out of it. And Carl Jung called that the transcendent function, the process of that sort of being able to hold the tension between this and that until something new bursts out of your unconscious, or on a collective level, out of the collective unconscious. So it's been a wild ride, to say the least.
A wild ride. The Unraveling was a wild ride. Yes.
Lots, if you can imagine, lots of juicy stories as you're reconciling sex and God. So
yeah, I think sometimes when you say spirituality and sexuality, some of those things are there's a lot of overlapping in those things, and some people can get those things sort of twisted sometimes as well when it comes to sexuality and spirituality. So one of the things that we definitely wanted to hit on, and yeah, I saw a video that you sent me, and it talked about just trying to understand the youth better. This Generation Z thing I'm trying to figure out as well. And I enjoyed just about the reconciling the spirituality and sexuality. I was like, that's even more interesting to me right there. Let's just change the subject just like that, But seriously, one of the things that, and we will get to that, I like to hit on that exactly because to me that is the interesting topic that I haven't spoken to anyone on the show about.
Oh, well, I love oversharing about it.
But one of the things that we did agree to discuss is about self-reflection, and that's exactly what you just talked about was self-reflection. When we're doing self-analysis and trying to improve our life, because I definitely believe in self-actualization. Heard that word years ago when I was studying psychology, when I thought I was going to be a therapist. And oh wow, what's that? Self-actualization. What is that? And it is a self-analysis and putting that at the forefront of your life. And it sounds like you did that.
Yes. And I was always a self-reflecting and super self-aware person. You could say self-conscious to the extent that it really was a burden when you're so self-conscious that like you're literally on alert and aware of how you are actually walking into a room and how people are receiving your energy. It can really feel like a burden. So it was so interesting that I had this mysterious calling to study depth psychology, which I had never heard of. I didn't know what it was. I had heard of Carl Jung. And when I went onto the website, and it came about because of a synchronicity, I went onto the website, I'm like, I don't know what any of this means, but it's like a spiritual text. It's like sacred language. And I had to find out. So it really pulled me in, and depth psychology became my framework for self-reflection. And I really do believe that synchronicity is what led to my calling now to encourage self-reflection, but also to provide a framework for self-reflection, because self-reflection is not about what you know. Self-reflection is finding the hidden meaning, what's hidden in your unconscious, the hidden agenda. So when you are having an emotional reaction, if it's neutral and like, that's annoying, whatever, no big deal. But if you're like, man, that really bugs me, that is your opportunity to turn it around on you. And that something is being mirrored back to you. And it's an opportunity for you to dig deeper into why do I feel that way? What are my assumptions about human beings and about humanity? And what does, whatever work ethic mean to me? And am I just seeing the world through my lens? And am I expecting others to conform to my beliefs? And why am I doing that? Why do I think I'm the right one? That's self-reflection. Self-reflection is really questioning. It's not affirming what you already know about yourself. I'm an INFJ.
Right.
I'm an introvert. So that's not self-reflection.
No.
But how
no.
does my introversion, what is the light side of it? What is the dark side of it? And how does it mix with my interactions with the world around me?
Right, exactly. And you just mentioned the Myers-Briggs, which I have taken that questionnaire before, and it sort of gives you these 4 letters about your personality. And now every time I take it, I think of like an INPJ, something like that. I think it is. I can't remember I always forget that 3rd letter, but like
so thinking or feeling,
J.
it's an F or a T.
And so what now? Oh, F or a T. You know what?
Yeah.
I think it's an F.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it's F because I'm definitely a feeling person.
INFP, or J, you said INFJ. Oh, welcome to the club. We're only 3% of the entire population of the world.
You know what? And I believe it.
And the thing about INFJs for your audience is that unless someone is really curious and interested in really what you think and feel, no one really knows you. So you're very misunderstood, unless you're an oversharer like me, where I just tell people how I think and how I feel.
I think that's what that's the reason why I think I overshare as well, because you learn that you want to uncloud this sort of mystery around you, and I think people are fine with the assumption that they think they know you, but they really don't. And a lot of people go around with these assumptions about who you are, and then they get to you sort of unveil yourself a little bit to them, the unraveling that you talked about earlier. And then they go, oh, you're nothing like I thought. And you're like, yeah.
Right. When people hear I am introverted, which totally misunderstood, introverted does not mean shy. No. Introverted means you need to recharge. You're
alone.
You're fueled by going into your inner world. Yeah. So even when I'm being and doing something extroverted and engaging with people, I really enjoy that. The only way it's energizing for me is if it's super meaningful and it's an opportunity for me to play in my inner playground with another person. Otherwise, it's so depleting for me.
Yeah, it is. I enjoy being around lots of people and that as well. But after that occurs, I need to definitely be around myself, or very few people as possible.
Yes.
Or it's not going to be good.
Yeah.
But enjoy people. I say I'm an introvert. It doesn't mean that I don't like being around people. I enjoy being around people. It's just that it requires more work. It's depleting. And I always tell people that I had a roommate years ago, and I told him, I said, when I come from work, I just need 30 minutes to an hour to myself before you ascend on me.
Right.
If you give me that 30 minutes, you have my attention. I will listen to your day. Go out and get some dinner, no problem. But I gotta have that 30 minutes after I get from work. You just cannot come into my room and ascend on me with all these, your day. And had been friends for many years, and that he was an extrovert, and most of my friends, close friends, are always extroverts. And he definitely didn't understand that at all, because the first time we ever lived around each other for the first time, and that wasn't a good experience at all, because he totally misunderstood, because he thought that I was, like you said, that veil of that sort of around you when you are an introvert or an INFJ, and then come to realize that this person really is an introvert and has to recharge alone. And that means you need to go away.
Right. Yeah. Extroverts just feed off the energy of the external world. I mean, they can it can feel like they're sucking your blood. They don't mean to, but it's just that's what feeds them.
Exactly. And as you get older, I think my friends are now in their 40s and 50s, so they get that more so that, oh, I have to be around people to recharge, and DJ has to be around no one to recharge. He needs that time to himself, and then I come out of my cubby hole and I'm ready to party again.
And that's a really great example of that's beautiful. That's real reflection and real respect, right? Because we are attracted to, like, I'm attracted to ENFPs. It's like a match made in heaven, unless the other person doesn't realize that the reason we're attracted to each other is to kind of balance each other out. And
Hmm.
so the extroverted person really wants to be more like
Introspective.
an introverted person, and the
Hmm.
introverted person needs that engagement as well. And
Hmm.
that's called, taking back your projections. When you're able to see that the other person is mirroring something back to you that's about you, not them, that's
Hmm.
taking back your projection.
Yeah, I like that. I like that, taking back your projection.
Mm-hmm.
I like that a lot. And again, I need to, one of my good friends, I need to ask her, hey, what is your, just take this, because she's probably, th those acronyms that you just mentioned, because she's an extrovert and she recharges around people, which is crazy to me. To me, but she wants to be around as many people as possible, and once we go to a dinner, and she will have several friends there, and after that I'm like, I'm going home and I'll talk to you later.
Yeah.
That was great. And she's like, oh, okay, no problem. And she's still out there conversating and talking to people. I'm like, just get away from me, I'm ready to go.
Yeah. Yeah.
But but because we are old enough and we're at a place in our life, we understand each other's
Yeah.
personalities, that you don't get offended by that, where that was a lot of issues, when people don't really understand it. They want everyone to be like them,
Mm-hmm.
and it
Mm-hmm.
doesn't work that way. So let's get into, because I really want to come back to, because you're the first person that I've talked to on this show who wanted to reconcile and talk about sexuality and spirituality. So I have to come back to it.
Okay.
And so what does that mean for you when you talk about spirituality and sexuality? And does it overlap for you? Are they two separate things? What does it mean to you?
Well, so I mentioned that coming of age in the 80s
Hmm.
was sort of like this schizophrenic experience, but I wasn't conscious of that. I was just determined to be an independent woman. And that not only manifested as getting myself to college, being an entrepreneur, running for offices in school, and going out there and getting into a male dominated field like financial planning. It also meant relationship wise that I was seeking a partner who appreciated equality. And also, I had sex and I was pretty into it. And it was a time where we're like, I don't care what you think. I'm going to go do this. Now, and in fact, if I can be sexual, if we're going to talk about sex, like when I learned how to pleasure myself, man, that was like a Christmas gift. I did it. I was like, can you be addicted to doing this? Because, like, this is so cool. I don't even need anybody. Like, I could just do it
Yeah.
on my own. So, what I didn't pay attention to, and I think I ignored, but it was absorbed by my body. And I think a lot of women who are my age, was this backlash part. So there were
Mhm.
actually, the 80s and the 90s were almost like the peak of progress now that I look back at it. So it wasn't until the early 80s, for example, that it became illegal for a man to rape his wife.
Okay.
Before that, it was perfectly legal.
Mm.
During the time when Anita Hill was testifying against Clarence
Clarence Thomas.
Thomas,
Hmm.
people were so down on her. But when she experienced what she said, um, it was perfectly legal to fire a woman if she didn't want to have sex with you.
Mm.
So then it became illegal. Until the early 80s, it was actually, there was a case, I don't know if you remember the Lifetime cable network. that was about consciousness raising of what women were experiencing and the violence against women. And part of the impetus for the Violence Against Women Act was a lawsuit against a woman who, as a circle of police officers and men watched her husband, who she had a restraining order against, stomp on her head to the point that she was paralyzed. And she sued the community for not having equal protection from the law. So this was a time when I came of age of progress, but there was this backlash, and there was born these movements that countered women's independence, women's reproductive rights, and they couched it in very warped versions of religious doctrine. So independent women were demonized as sexual deviants and homewreckers. So now I ignored all that. I went off to life, and, I did what I did, and I found a man who appreciated women's equality and all of that stuff. And then, when does midlife unraveling start? Part of what I began analyzing was, when was the first moment where there was like this little twinge in it? But I'll skip over that. So it was about 10 years later, and I had an issue in my marriage. But I didn't even know I had an issue in my marriage. I was very much in denial. And this gets very complex, because when you begin to unravel, you have to sort through your parental complexes. So the way that you show up in life and the way that you show up in a marriage is very much influenced by your childhood experience. And as much as you want to say, I'm not going to be my dad or my mom, sometimes it shows up in a really sneaky way, and not exactly the same way, in a really sneaky way. So the universe had to orchestrate a couple dramatic events to get me to be like, oh, there's something going on in my marriage and my relationship. Okay. So then all of that kind of started unraveling. Eventually I had to make this decision to get divorced. So to get to the sex and God part, once I knew that, my marriage is really going to be ending, it was all of this weird stuff came up out of my unconscious. And I call it complexes having to do with men and sex. Really weird things happen to me when I go study in a bar, and all of a sudden I would feel this invasive energy by a man who came close to me, and then he'd offer to buy me a glass of wine, and I'm like, sure, even though I felt so threatened by him. And then I would shame myself, like, why did I just do this? Like, really odd things started happening to me over and over. And I had to.
You dated before you married your husband? So how many years have you dated before you married your husband?
I could have paid you to say that right now. That's a perfect question. What I realized was, and yes, I did, I was quite free, but what I realized was my unconscious had this hidden other agenda for why I married my husband. Now, I thought I loved my husband. I did. Like, I loved him. I was married to him for over 20 years and whatever. But what I realized was that I had never really felt the kind of desire and passion that I should have felt. But I didn't know it, right, until I felt it later. And so I realized that one of the hidden agendas for marrying my husband was to save me from the chaos of my relationship and sexual experiences. So I was very confused. I had strong sexual energy. And it was like, if I was assertive sexually with a man, that made him run the other way. And then I had a lot of confusing experiences. And I was like, what is wrong with me? And the day, literally the month before I met my husband, who's not my husband anymore, I decided I hate men. I had felt exploited. I had experiences that I felt shame about. So even though I felt like empowered to have sex, I ended up feeling shame about it. And a lot of women, feel this. And then literally I'm done. I'm just done with men. And then I meet this man. And he's like, well, I'll call you tomorrow. I'm like, yeah, right, whatever. And he lives six hours away. And he does call me the next day. And he kisses me on the forehead. And I'm like, oh, isn't that sweet? Wow. And then the next day he does call me and we get together, and I actually meet his friends who are very nice. Now that night I didn't let him come home with me the first night, but the second night I did. But anyway, and he woke up in the morning and he's like, oh man, you got business books holding up your window. Like he was like in love with me immediately. On Monday, he sent me a dozen roses.
Wow, like, that's great.
Well, okay. But I was like, yeah, he's fun. So he come to town and we go out and I was just having fun. And then all of a sudden one day my sister says, you're kind of mean to him. And I'm like, what do you mean I'm mean to him? And then I was like, oh. So we dated and a few months went by. And I think I became like less defensive and I opened up a little bit. Mm-hmm. And then there was this specific moment that I can remember when I was like kind of snuggling and thought, this is a good man.
Mm-hmm. But I'm just saying, when I said dated, how many people have you dated before you met him? I know you talked a little bit about, because I'm trying to understand when it comes to that, sometimes when, just thinking about sexuality in terms of not having that, because it sounded like to me that you just hadn't tapped into that because you hadn't met anybody yet who allowed you to, or you felt comfortable enough to tap into that level of sexuality or that level of openness until you divorced your husband.
Well, no. See, no. If like my husband and I had a wonderful sex life. What I'm saying is I didn't realize I had in a way, he represented safety for me.
Okay.
So we had a fine sex life. So that didn't, and I was really comfortable. All these years I thought everything was just fine. I hadn't known that I had like this stuff that I sort of ran away from. I was able to say, oh, that's over. And now, so in a way, I don't want to say I settled because I did love this man, but unconsciously I did, is sort of what I did. Now,
yeah, I get it.
Right. So then, life goes on and I begin this unraveling process and these complexes come up. So it's like, okay, you've been pushing this down because you haven't had to deal with it, but now you're going to have to deal with this stuff. So for a time I dealt with boundaries and respecting my intuition and my feeling and that sort of thing. So then I was in my master's PhD program studying depth psychology. So I was having a lot of fun with this. I was like, oh my God, I'm in the grip of a complex right now. Like I am not even in control of myself. Why did I accept a glass of wine from a guy who creeps me out? And then I had to go in the shower because I felt disgusted. Like, what's going on? So I dealt with that. And then I was like, okay, settle down, man. Let's just study. I had a new job. I was trying to have peace for my children during this unraveling of my marriage. And I'm at the beach and I'm studying at the tiki bar. And this man is standing next to me and he's trying to get the bartender's attention. And I knew the bartender. So I was like, hey, come on over here. Help out this guy. We start chatting with each other about beach volleyball and he's looking for a team. And I was like, oh yeah, I'll ask my team, like, give me your email. And then he walks away with his burger and I had this little twinge and I was like, what just happened there? Like, what, like, does he really want to play volleyball or was that about something else? Was he like flirting with me? Like, I have no idea. It's been 25 years. Right. And he's quite young. And then I was like, oh, damn it, man. There's that stuff again. There's that sex and, and romance. And, oh no, I just didn't even want to go there right now, but it got activated in me. And so we had a very
how old were you at this particular phase?
I was just turned 50.
Oh wow. Wow. So would you say at that age were you like, because some women peak sexually differently than men do you think at that time you were like, okay, well, I'm at a different, I'm viewing sexuality different at this age than I did before?
I wasn't viewing it anyway. It just happened to me. Okay. It just happened. And apparently, and it even gets better than this. Apparently, this happens to a lot of women in their 40s and 50s after they get divorced and end a long-term relationship. You're just, it's just happens to you? So we have a very awkward thing going on. And I'm like, oh my God, is this what millennials are like? Like nobody commits to anything. And what is this, the secret language, this text? And like, it was so confusing for me. And then eventually the day comes, we have a date and he wants to, and I'm like, no, my God, you're the first man I've kissed. Like, you shouldn't probably say that to a guy, like a guy who's 15 years younger than you, that this is my, first man, you're the first guy I've kissed in 25 years, but I did. And so it was so weird. And then he kind of like, okay, that's it. So we eventually reconnected and we did have sex, and it was wonderful. Like, it wasn't like all passionate, but it was like, oh, I feel pretty good about my body. Well, then he dropped me like a hot potato. It's like, oh, what is that all about? Now he unleashed something in me though. And in fact, the first night after our first date, when we didn't do anything, I got in the car and all of a sudden I was like so aroused. I couldn't stand it. I didn't make it home without like pleasuring myself. I got home and I was like, oh my gosh. I've been unleashed. And so then he went away and I was like, how dare you? You opened me up. Get back over here. So then I had to hit the online dating. I did OkCupid and for. So this was my next phase. So I dealt with some complexes about boundaries, and then I got unleashed. And then I was like, okay, now I have no choice, but I need to date men. So I get online and I had 10 dates, 10 men. Some I dated more than once. And it was almost like, but here was my agenda. There was no agenda. I needed to learn how to relate to men again. I wasn't looking for anybody. I wasn't looking for anything. I was just totally curious about, and my biggest fear was being able to politely reject someone I wasn't attracted to. That's what I was worried about. I wasn't worried about them like liking me. I was worried about, well, oh my gosh, how do I spend 2 hours with a man and then I don't want to? So I learned how to do it. But it was interesting because each man, it was almost like the universe was sending me these little lessons one by one. And they had to do with me coming into relationship with my body and sexuality. But
did you have body issues? I mean, did you feel like I don't want to be naked in front of a man, or I don't want him to see me naked?
No, I had what I referred to. I told one really kind, yummy man, and they were all 33. They're all 15 years younger than me. Not on purpose. It just happened. I was like, why are you attracted to me? He's like, oh, you look like you're 33. And I'm like, well, I don't, but whatever, okay, I'll take it.
Take the compliment.
It was more like I said, I have performance anxiety, but it wasn't anxiety about performing for or to them. It was anxiety about, if they're trying to pleasure me, what if I'm not feeling it? I have to feel bad. So it was like anxiety about, well, what do I do if it's just not really working for me? And I would feel, so that's what I mean by performance anxiety. And one of the men, he's my friend now, and he studied sexuality from a philosophical standpoint. So we had great conversations, and he was like, yeah, I have my own issues too. So it was like, really, all these men were just so kind. I had greatest experience. And then, but after 6 months and learning different lessons and being able to be like, no, I was like, oh my gosh, I got to quit. I need a break because my brain's on fire. I can't even sleep at night. Like something got activated in my brain through this 6-month process. So I took a break. I was working on my paper to pass my master's, to get into my PhD. And it was 6 weeks later, and I was sitting on the beach with my books all over me. And other than like, that'd be nice if a cute guy walked up to me on the beach. Other than that, I was like, nope, I'm serious again. Just stay away. I don't need any romance. I don't need any sex. Just let me be for now. And then all of a sudden I'm reading about psychological types, and I feel a gaze. And I look up, and then I look back down because I'm like, oh my God, is that guy looking at me? Like, and he's sitting back like this, and he's got these aviator sunglasses on, and I felt this intense energy. And then I looked up again, and I was like, oh my God, is he looking at me? Like, it was just weird. Like, I was overtaken with awkwardness. And then I look up again, and he's not there. And I'm like, okay, back to studying. I look up again, and Now he's standing over here with his
Mm.
leaning back on a pole, like just looking all like cool and in charge. And I'm
Okay.
like, oh my God. Then I look back and he's gone, and my eyes peer over here, and all of a sudden he's like kneeling right in front of my chair. And I'm like, oh, okay. And he
Mhm.
says, I just had to find out what you're reading.
Okay. Okay.
That's
That's a good
awesome,
line.
right? And I'm like, well, I'm reading about psychological types. I'm a nerd. And he's like, oh, tell me more. And so for the next 2 hours, we were swept up in a kind of like, it was like Aphrodite overtook me, Hermes the trickster overtook him. Well, I don't know. It was my experience. And after a while, I was like, oh my God, I have to go study. And he's like, well, I'd like to take you to a movie. So then, oh my gosh, just again activated. But it wasn't my choice. The online dating was my choice. This was not my choice. So
Yeah.
I get swept up with this younger man who now I feel desire I never felt before. Oh, just kissing.
Okay.
Just kissing. I feel something and touching, and I just feel alive in a way that I never felt before. And after a few weeks, I was wondering, why hasn't he tried to have
Called.
sex with me? No, we were seeing each
Oh,
other
okay.
all the time. But
Okay.
I'm like, why isn't this gone any further? I'm like waiting for this man. All he had to do was touch me, and I was like on fire. And one night I told him, I'm like, I'd really like to. And he's like, oh, you would. And so we get to the point where he says, I have a conflict having sex outside of marriage. And I was like, what? What
Yeah.
33-year-old guy like has a conflict having sex out of marriage? How can you do this to me? You've unleashed me, and I feel this desire. And I'm like, no. But I don't say that because he's like, well, do you still want to hang out with me? I'm like, yes. So this is where it gets to the spirituality.
Okay.
So it turns out he's like a fundamentalist Christian, and I'm about the opposite that you can be. I'm spiritual, but inclusive. He's like exclusive. Yeah. And, but that was a blessing. So I highly recommend people really explore no sex sex, like really explore intimacy that doesn't have the goal of penetration and even orgasm. That is just like exploring your body and, just, pants on, tops off. Just like I had a Kundalini experience actually just laying on top of him. And while he was kind of like sleeping, napping, and I like almost like had an orgasm just laying there, and I had an image of a snake entering me and sort of opening me up, and that was all just in stillness, not even moving. And so that part was really interesting. And then we had a period of time where we couldn't really be intimate anyway. We couldn't really see each other. We were in communication, but we couldn't see each other. And I started exploring Christianity again. Why? I don't know, because he was Christian. So I was like, oh, I'm going to give this one more shot, right? Like, can it transcend patriarchy? I don't know, but let's dig into it a little more. But I ended up really coming to a conclusion that Christianity wasn't for me. But in the meantime, I began experiencing what it feels like to surrender and to sort of put your burden onto something more bigger than you, the transcendent. And in my meditation and in my prayer, all of a sudden I had images of light and chalices and decorative bowls that were really, really affirming that I was opening up to a deeper part of me.
Yeah, that's Kundalini. I think that's when it comes to Kundalini, that is, if what I'm told is that when because as you said earlier, is how one of the symbols of Kundalini is a serpent, and the serpent at the base of your spine. And if you can imagine a snake in your spine, crawling up your spine, and it's supposed to activate the heart, right?
Well, it activates everything. It goes right up through the crown of your head, and it's a kind of, for me, I interpreted it as touching a very ancient feminine. And that was the goal. The task was to come into relationship with my own feminine. And the Kundalini is like it's like a coming together of the feminine and the masculine. And so I had that moment with him, but then alone in prayer and meditation, I surrendered and I emptied out, and I couldn't tell if this light was coming from my head or coming into it. And it really was both. And during those periods in solitude, in prayer meditation, I was so aroused. I had to like have an orgasm. And so all of a sudden now, this is how sexuality and spirituality came together for me, that in the surrendering, in the opening and becoming receptive to something transcendent, that it is arousing. It is pleasurable.
I always say spirituality is the biggest aphrodisiac.
Yeah. I mean, and I didn't understand it other than.
So did you and him ever, have actual sexual intercourse?
Yes. Yeah, we did.
Okay.
But it was like I came to understand that the relationship eventually ended, and it was very like obvious, like, oh, okay, this isn't going to work. But I really knew from the beginning, because it was so archetypal, the experience, that it wasn't about the relationship or permanence of the relationship, that our relationship was used. It was a vessel for my transformation. And if I wouldn't have been studying depth psychology, I might not have really appreciated that. And I might have been very attached to it working, which is another thing that I work with my clients on, is detaching from the need for permanence of a relationship, even it's a marriage, because as soon as you need something to last, then you compromise. You compromise on integrity and honesty and that sort of thing. So once I ended that relationship, that's when the creativity started unleashing out of me. So if you go back, it's like it very much illustrates Carl Jung's process of individuation. And individuation is a conscious process of coming into relationship with your unconscious, your self, your capital S self, or if you're like a God person, God. But it's like this deeper and transcendent part of you that's also connected to the collective unconscious. So you go from personal. So it's like, I actually should like write maybe a book about that, how it really tracks with Jung's theory, with his theory, which is you start with the personal complexes, the parental complexes. What did I learn about love as a child? All this stuff. And as you sort of come into relationship and resolve some of those, the doorway to the archetypes is open. And man, they sweep you up, and you are not in control of it, except in your capacity to reflect about the experience and not be swallowed by it. Because you can be swallowed up by archetypes. There's a whole movement of people swallowed up by a negative version of the archetype right now. So so it's, and this, the story is still continuing, but this all happened over like a 4-year period for me.
Yeah, well, that's exciting. I mean, to me, I have friends who talked about, having that experience of the Kundalini and sometimes it's good and sometimes it's bad, because you have to be, in the right mind space to receive something that way.
Yeah.
You can't put what's a good analogy? You can't put hot, something hot in, well, I think a good analogy would be like putting water in a glass and then putting it into a freezer, and a freezer having that intensity, it's like gonna crack that glass. So I think that's a good, for lack of a better analogy, of
I like that
holding.
Yeah, I like that actually, because it's like a container is what you need in order to be able to explore the experience. So a glass, even the opposite, like putting boiling water in a glass could crack it as well. So so that's why I'm so excited about providing a framework for people through my coaching and my book and my blog articles, is that, I want people to be open to exploring these things, but if they don't have the capacity to, reflect about it and really realize that there's meaning in the images, and not to take them literally, but they're really metaphors and symbols of things, that they can crack. It is true, or they can become very overwhelmed, and they can be overwhelmed, for example, in anxiety. And anxiety is actually a calling from your soul to do something different. But if you're not able to kind of like, have that
and
strong container.
increase your capacity, because
Yeah.
one of the things that I mean, I'm a part of spiritual groups as well, and one of the things they teach you is that how to increase your capacity as you're learning about these different archetypes and methods of becoming more self-aware. Because if you don't do both, then what happens is you'll find yourself, we're not getting into the maybe next time you come on talk about the dark night of the soul, you know,
Yeah. And yes. And the dark night of the soul is part of the process, and it
part
can
of the
be
process.
overwhelming. But yeah,
Oh
you're right.
yeah.
Like if you don't actually have like, oh, okay, if this happens to me, a kind of self-awareness and what do I do with it? How do I journal about it? How do I talk about it? Do artwork, movement. If you don't have the framework, then yes, you either run away from it. So a lot of people respond to the midlife unraveling or the dark night of the soul by running away from it. And because it's bubbling up, so like it has to be unleashed, you might use alcohol, or you might use
That's the
sex,
thing,
or you
right?
might use something, that's dysfunctional, as opposed to, because it's so scary, but you don't even know what it is that's scaring you. And so you
Right.
just unconsciously start looking for ways to quiet it down.
Yeah, to numb it. You're right.
Yeah.
Exactly. Exactly. So we totally changed the subject, didn't we? And then what we were talking about. But thank you. I mean, I definitely wanted to understand better because when I heard the word unraveling, I said, oh yeah, I definitely got to find out more about that because we all are unraveling something. And I went through a 7 year period of my life where I was totally unraveling, and I'm still, I think we're all unraveling, but it was an intense part of my life, and thank God that I am more so on the other side of it now, and so I
And
got to go ahead.
And I just want to say that this worked out perfectly because our pre-recording chat
Hmm.
inspired me to write a blog post about what we are going to talk about.
I read it.
And so I would love for like your guests, we were going to talk about, what is Generation Z mirroring back to us. And I think it's, if I must say so myself, it's a fantastic blog post. It's about a 13-minute read.
Hmm.
And I mean, I'd love for people, because we were going to talk
I
about that, but they
I'll
can still get
definitely
it in the blog post.
include that link to that article in the show description. And you also have an exercise in there
Mm-hmm.
about how to deal with anxiety. And what?
Yes, yes, I have. I've been starting to do little mini lessons. It's called Soul Talk, and they're up on YouTube and they're also on my website. But one of them is how to talk to your anxiety. And the other one, and it sounds silly, but it's amazing. I talk to my anxiety when it comes up. And last time I talked to it, it came out in like a poem. And so creativity, in a poem is the outcome of really being open to creative intelligence sort of flowing through you. And then I have another video on my YouTube that is about how to engage with your inner child. So it's relevant to our conversation about unraveling, because the process of coming to terms, with midlife and parental complexes is really to go back and touch and get reconnected to a part of you, a younger part of you. And sometimes it's a 6 year old, sometimes it's a teenager, sometimes it's a young adult. And it's not about like reliving painful experiences. It's really more about going back and like, that part of you has wisdom, and that part of you
Uh,
has memories before you got corrupted. So sometimes your inner child is like wants to give you a hug. Sometimes your
right.
inner child wants to be remembered and wants to be like integrated into your life. So I have another video as well.
Okay. Okay. Cool. And we'll put that also in the show description as well. So I wanted to thank you for being a guest on the What's Up with DJ podcast, and definitely glad that we had a chance to speak. And I definitely want to have more conversations with you in the future. And
Good.
how do people find you?
So they can find everything on my website, deborahlukovich.com. So DeborahLukovich.com. Right on the front page on the top are all my social media icons. So they can get to my podcast, they can get to my Instagram, my LinkedIn, my YouTube, Twitter, everything is on there. And then also my blog. And then, and they can find out about my book too.
And your book is Your Soul is Talking, Are You Listening?
Mm-hmm.
5 Steps to Uncovering Your Hidden Purpose.
Yes. And then, of course, I am a depth psychology coach, which is something between a therapist and a coach.
Yes. And what is the name of your podcast?
Dose of Depth.
Oh, yes. Okay. All right. Well, we
Oh,
definitely got a dose of depth today. That's for
yes.
sure.
Yes.
All right. Well, thank you.
Thank you for having me.